Linda, if you can unmute and lead us through the presentation today. And
I can.
join me in welcoming Linda Barhor and her team.
Hi, guys. Good morning. I'm excited to be here again, and maybe next year we can do all of Black History Month with presentations and ideas, and I'm excited. So last week I recommended a book called Waking Up White, and it's revelatory. This week I'm going to recommend a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram K. Kendi. And in that, one of the things I really learned from that is how everything gets normed according to what is dominant. So in our culture, white is dominant, male is dominant, heterosexuality is dominant. So any social science, and I'm ashamed of my own tradition here, social science gets normed against white male heterosexuals. And so anything that's not that comes out deviant or less than. And so I just wrote a little sentence before I go into what I've really scheduled here, that oppression has been operative by the norms that whiteness, maleness, heterosexuality have established. And if you believe that human dignity requires you to voice a protest against any one of these, you'll find yourself standing up for each of these, as Jim referenced in his wonderful sermon. Speaking up, calling ourselves to account is important. I implore you not to go weary of the call to love and respect every human being, because people of color are weary. Women do get weary, and the LGBTQ community is weary too. So with that said, as beautiful as all the prayers were this morning, I have one more prayer before I turn it over to Ruth. God, whose name has been used to enslave those who bear your image. God, whose name has been used to steal this land and kill those who bear your image. God, whose name was called upon by Moses and Miriam and Martin Luther King and Sojourner Truth, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. God, who raised up prophets to speak truth to power and poets to speak truth to stupid. We call on your holy name to give us what we need to undo what has been done in your name. We call on your name to bring your fierce mercy upon us and remove our complacency and complicity. We call on your name to heal the wounds of those whose daily reality we do not understand. We call on your name to give us a holy curiosity about what being Black in America is really like, Lord. We call on your name to free us from our cherished notions of being good that keep us from hearing these truths. We call on your name to give us this day our daily truth, our daily humility, our daily rage, our daily hope. This country is burning, Lord. May it be a cleansing, Holy Spirit fire. Guide us to believe that the true name of God is stronger than what has been done in God's name. Come, Holy Spirit. Amen. That's a prayer by Nadia Bolz-Weber, who's a Lutheran minister and very muscular in her faith. So with that said, and with the great shame that by the time I graduated college, and some of you are younger or older than me, women, Black women, did not have the vote for another 2 years. Just kills me. All right, I'm going to sign off. And Ruth, would you tell this community of the experiment that you've been trying?
Okay, can you guys hear me? I hope. Okay. My name is Ruth Olson, and when Linda came to me and asked if I would share, I kind of wanted to cringe and run away because I tend to be the shy person. But I realized I needed to, for myself and for my students and for other people, is to and because I don't want Linda to be disappointed in me either, but is to stand up and basically explain a little bit about what I've been learning this year. I wouldn't consider myself a racist at all. I grew up on the mission field with my parents and had a very Christian, and didn't realize when I came back to the States, how privileged that white life was. And then in coming to this church in the last 6 years, for me, it's been a time of opening my eyes to injustice all around. This church is so good at bearing up one another's needs and making people aware. So I spent time reading. I'm in this book that Linda just suggested right now. I was reading a book this summer called, what was it called? Raising White Kids. And it's a great book for parents as well as teachers. So I think for me as a teacher, I have sort of stayed away from the different celebrations of the months, Hispanic and all those things, because I really wasn't sure how to do it without being a racist. So this past month, I have taken on 2 lessons with students. One actually starts on Monday, but one of teaching about the great talent, skills of the different Black Americans. And this one specifically was on a sculptor, Augusta Savage, and a piece she made that dealt with, was inspired by Lift Every Voice and Sing. I was excited to teach the lesson, nervous to teach a lesson, but really excited to see my kids receptive to it. And I had about 3 or 4 kids that really stayed afterwards and wanted to talk and things like that. And so I want to continue to do that, and I want to continue to learn, and I want to continue to embrace everybody, and as Jim was saying, lean into suffering. That struck me today. So that's it.
Thank you, Ruth. Mariko, where are you?
I'm here. Can you hear me? Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Mariko Takahashi. I know most of you, I think. I just want to give you a brief insight into what I found this last year. But before I do that, I need to look at my own background in perhaps being a racist and perhaps being the object, being being the object of racism. So most of my life I've spent as a minority. I grew up in Japan where I wasn't a minority, but I left when I was 6, and I moved to the post-colonial country of Kenya, where the topmost, the upper classes were British, the middle class was Indian, interestingly enough, and at the bottom were African peoples. I went to an all British school, And I remember distinctly when a girl, there was one Indian girl who was my first friend overseas. She didn't get invited to a birthday party where I was invited to. And I asked the girl whose birthday it was why she was not invited. And she said, well, she's not a Christian. That seemed odd to me because I wasn't a Christian either, as far as that's concerned, but she invited me. So I kind of surmised that it had something to do with skin tone somehow. Throughout school, in middle school, I was in an English school, British school, essentially in Singapore, where I was told things like, you know, microaggressions by the teacher, like, oh, I thought Japanese were industrious, as he threw back a test to me that where I'd earned, what, 54% or something. And there were all kinds of these kinds of sort of microaggressions throughout, right? And interesting enough, when I did go back to Japan when I was 15 as a high school student, it was now the Japanese who were treating me as a minority because I had been abroad for too long and I was not Japanese enough, right? And also that I didn't behave as a girl should. That was a big part of it. But all this time, to me, I'd never been to the United States before I was 18, seemed like a place of a country of freedom. You know, I knew it only from popular culture. And in the 70s, when I did come, soul music was a huge thing in Japan. And so I looked forward to going to college in the United States. And you can imagine my shock when I came here and realized that culture is so divided that people are segregated in Los Angeles. And that, you know, the area around USC where I went to school was at that time basically South Central, well, it is South Central, and it was full of Black people, and yet there were very few on campus. And few Black people even knew in the area about how the campus existed or what it was, which seemed very, very strange to me. And I came to realize that this was not what you hear about overseas, right? America, the land of freedom. So I knew there was racism and I was concerned about it because I'd been the object of racist remarks and so forth in my past. But this last year really, really took the cake, it seems to me, because in this small pocket of what we like to call Little Huntington Beach, where I live, I saw racism as never before. In my neighborhood, there are blue ribbons all over the place, and blue ribbons indicate support for police. Now, I'm not saying I don't support the police, but this all came up as the city of Garden Grove planned for a BLM protest. And at the BLM protest, which was peaceful, one of our city commissioners took, not just photographs, he took a video during that time, and he kept making snide remarks. He was, well, he wasn't exactly elected because he's a city commissioner, but he was working for the city. And here he was saying things like, to a woman who had a banner up saying, "I can't breathe." He said, "Well, if you can't breathe, why don't you sit down?" You know, saying things like this, making it public. And I realized that you have to do something about local politics if you want to get anywhere. I've never been that interested in local politics before, but this kind of got me going. And I really, actually, I'm not even a citizen of the United States, so I can't vote, but my children do, and I can influence them, right? So that's what I've been doing. Also, I've noticed there's an uptick in the kind of racist remarks I hear in students, especially in the South Orange County Community College where I teach. That bothers me a lot. I tried to, when I had them look at the film called 13th, last year, I immediately got this really sort of a remark about how my classes were, and this is a class in US history, sort of socialist in thinking, that it was all about racism and nothing else, yeah, etc. So, I mean, he thought that there was little patriotism in my class, and I wrote back and said, I don't believe in blind patriotism. So, what can I do about it? I think there isn't very much that one can do about it, except that in my position, I can still teach, and I am still very much willing to change, at least if it's just one student, one student at a time. And also, I can involve myself in local politics, even though I cannot vote. I can do things like write to the city council, which I've done a couple of times now. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was, a young person, I wouldn't even have dreamed that I would have been able to write to a city council for political reasons. No, that wasn't me at all. But here I am, finally, at the age of 63, whatever, almost 63, coming to grips with something that had been bothering me all along, and now it's making me do something finally. So I'm not grateful for all that's gone on in the last year, but I'm grateful for it for one area, in that it gave me some sort of direction, and it gave me a way to perhaps be closer to what might be my vocation, as Father Lee said. Thanks.
Amanda?
Thank you, Ruth and Mariko, and those who talked last week about their experiences. And I want to actually say a couple of things about why we should be talking about anti-Black racism specifically, and then have some reflection questions just for us to be thinking about, and if anyone would like to respond, either to speak or to put something in the chat. And I want to speak specifically about anti-Black racism because right now in the United States, we are seeing a lot of often very violent anti-Asian racism around the COVID virus that has been fostered by people in power in our country. And this continues to be both in small ways. I just heard from someone I know a couple days ago who was out walking, who's Asian American, and a white person walked past and coughed at her as if to say, this virus is your fault, as well as continued violence against people who are Asian Americans and Asian immigrants in the United States. So why would we focus specifically on anti-Black racism? And because anti-Blackness is really ingrained into so many of the systems that were established at the foundation of the United States. Now, I am not a US historian. Mariko could speak to this much more, but it is really integral to much of the systems that are foundational in the United States. Banking originally was set up to give slave owners loans to buy slaves. They used slaves as collateral for mortgages. Things that we don't even think of as being founded on racism and anti-Blackness have that as its root. Even for non-Black people, racism that they experience may be rooted in anti-Blackness. So if people from South Asia who are dark skinned, or from other parts of the world who are dark skinned, the racism that they experience is often rooted in anti-Blackness. There's what is called colorism, which is favoring light skin over dark skin within different ethnic groups, then people with darker skin are, in a sense, suffering the effect of anti-Blackness, that somehow darker skin is less beautiful, less valued than lighter skinned people, because lighter skinned people are closer then to the white norm of our society. And there's also anti-Blackness, anti-Black racism within other communities that are marginalized. Through the UC Irvine Humanities Center, which I co-direct, we did a series last summer with the Asian American Pacific Islander community that we co-hosted with some community organizations about anti-Blackness in the Asian American Pacific Islander community, and coming to terms with racism within that community against Black people. So this is why I think it's important for us to think about racism and oppression broadly, but also think about it specifically around anti-Black racism. So what I'd like to do right now is throw out some questions for reflection. And like I said, these, if you would like to respond, this is an opportunity to either speak about your own experiences or what you have been thinking about and doing this past year, or something to take home with you and to continue to think about. And I'll actually put them in the chat also. So the first one is to reflect on where you see systemic racism in your life. So systemic racism meaning how systems are privileging white people. So how you may have benefited from that because you're identified as white, or how you may have experienced harm because you are identified as non-white. Another question to reflect on is, where do you see anti-Black racism specifically? So not sort of generally racism, but specifically anti-Black racism showing up in your communities and the circles that you operate in, and also where might you see anti-Black racism appearing in communities that you're a part of that might be marginalized in other ways. And a third question to reflect on is, are there a few people in your life who you can come together with to talk about what you're learning and thinking about systemic racism, about how it affects your life, about how it affects other people in your community around you, about how you would like to try and make change, about how you are trying to figure out what to do, because it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for us to think about ways in which we benefit from racism. It's uncomfortable for us to think about ways we act and do things that are racist that we may not even realize because it's just kind of ingrained in our culture. It's uncomfortable to try to do something that we think is going to be helpful or good and have it actually not really be received in the way we thought it might be received. And so I think it's really important to have some people that we can talk through this. I actually have a group from a training that I did last summer. And we talk at least once a month about, oh, you know, I was, you know, this is something I've been trying, or I did this and it seemed to have worked, or I was, you know, did this and it didn't work. So I will stop there and I guess open up for anyone who'd like to speak.
I just want to clarify, we have
Oh.
about 12 more minutes
Mhm.
for the rest of the program. Are people able to unmute themselves, Jim?
Yes, they can.
Hi, my name is Steve Hively, and I just wanted to share a conversation I had with Alan Dobie, Juanita's late husband. Probably one of the last ones I had with him. It was the last Black History program he was at, and we were waiting in line for the food, and I was talking to him. And Alan was born and spent his early life in Mississippi, about 60 miles down Highway 61 from where my dad was raised. Talking about that, and it's in the Mississippi Delta, which is a hotbed of, it was, a land of apartheid back then for sure, very segregated. And anyway, Alan was telling me how he ended up moving to California. And so his family lived on a farm outside of this town, Hollandale, Mississippi. And the county built a highway next to their farm that went to the other major highway and, across the county or whatever. And it increased the value of their land. And this white farmer wanted to buy their farm. And Alan's father said no. And the response was they came and burned their house down and, drove them off their land. And that's how they moved to California. They were literally driven out, in a form of genocide, out of their home. And anyway, it just really sticks with me today and did then. It was like speaking to a Holocaust survivor, because we read about those things in the history books, but it's all kind of somewhat remote when it's part of history. But when it's somebody's personal experience that you're standing in line at lunch with, it's just way more real. And so anyway, I guess I share that to tell you that the effects of racism in that world, in our world today, can be much more violent. I mean, all the violent stuff is not an exaggeration, it is real. And, I'm really thankful that he shared that story with me. And, as that generation dies, future generations are going to be kind of cut off from that personal experience. But, and then I also struck how his family's experience is different than my family's experience was. My family was a white family in a town in Mississippi, 1,500 people, probably 500 whites, 1,000 African-Americans, 2 separate school districts for that little tiny town. They couldn't even support one school district, 2 separate everythings. Left side of the main street was for Black stores, the white stores, the other side was for Black stores. Anyway, and I kind of have to live with that legacy somehow. I don't know how to reconcile that to my life today. And, anyway, that's just part of who I am at this point. And anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to share that story from Alan, because I think it's important for us to know his history and that history is real, and it's really worse than we can really imagine it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Steve. And let me just, I know we only have a couple of seconds, but to follow up on that story, when white people think of Ku Klux Klan, they read about it. Alan's father sat on the porch with a shotgun that night when he knew they were coming for him and saw the sheets. And Alan and his dad realized they couldn't overtake them because there were too many of them. And so Alan's dad had tried to fight back the first night. The second night they came back and there were even more Ku Klux Klan people in sheets. And his dad has put a plan in place to save his family by sending him to some white neighbors who had agreed to take them. And he had a safe house that he could go to because he knew he would have to run. And so when they came back the second night in droves, he left himself later on. His family, Alan and his mom and his siblings had already left to go to safe houses. And then they burned the house down. And that's how they ended up in California. um, that's real, and it's still real today to some extent. So, so to tell you even about selling a house, for example, if you, not too long ago, I sold a retirement house. And every time I sell a house, I know that because my house is always in a white neighborhood, because that's where you get the best return on the investment. And I'm a businesswoman. If I'm going to invest, I want the best return on investment. But when it's time to sell that house, I know that the majority population doesn't really want to live behind me, no matter how beautiful the house is. And so all the Black artifacts have to be taken down, or they won't buy it. Or if they buy it, they will buy it as a defective product, although it's as beautiful as everybody else's house. But the fact that I live there and I'm Black doesn't have the same value as if I weren't Black. So that's what you have to do. So I share that to say things have changed, yes, but not nearly enough. Not if you're the oppressed person, not nearly enough. So I really thank you for sharing your stories and sharing them honestly, and for giving me a safe space to tell you what I honestly can share with no, I know you'll take it in the spirit that's it is intended. We love each other. There is no feeling of anything other than loving this community, and I'm so grateful for that. But I just wanted to share that since Steve brought that up and put it in perspective for today, as well as for 90 years ago, 80 years ago when this happened to Alan. Actually, it was 11, so it was probably 70 some years ago.
Thank you, Juanita. And it is very important that we have the opportunity, all voices, to be able to speak, and all genders and all of this beautiful, diversity that we have, that be able to tell the stories. And for many of us will be a process of learning and relearning many of those stories. Father Jim asked to see if he could share a story. Do we still have time for that? David, help me keep track of the.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we got 5-10 minutes, but 10 minutes would be
Jim, could you go ahead and
Sure. I just wanted to tell a short story. About 6 years ago, my older daughter wanted to go get a haircut and actually get her hair colored. And we went to a Korean salon in Irvine. And I had no idea how long hair coloring took. It took forever, but that's not the point of the story. So I was waiting there, and while Sona's hair was being colored and we were waiting for it to go in, another client came and started talking to the hairstylist. And I had interacted with the stylist in English because she was bilingual, but the other client was speaking to the stylist in Korean. And they started talking, and I could understand what they were saying. And this woman who was getting her hairstyled said that she had recently moved to Irvine from LA's Koreatown. And when the stylist asked, "Oh, why did you move?" the woman said very casually, "Because there were too many Black people in LA." And the stylist didn't miss a beat and said, "Oh, that makes sense." And so I raised this to kind of just share, to answer Amanda's second question, of kind of really owning up to the anti-Blackness that is pervasive within the Korean American and larger Asian American communities. We are not immune to the toxic ways that anti-Blackness is just endemic and pandemic as the current virus is. So that's all I'll share.
Thanks, Jim. Amanda, is there anything else to today, or?
Can I share my screen? Do I have the capacity to do that?
Let me make you a co-host, Amanda. Hold on.
Okay. And I will send the resources and the reflection questions to Father Abel to send out. one other thing that I just want to, I'll share with you is a graphic that is really helpful to think about in terms of, when we talk about equity and equality. And I'm looking to the side because I have it. Can you still see this graphic? And that treating people with equality assumes that everyone started at the same place. And I think that anyone who really looks around at our society can acknowledge that not everyone starts at the same place, and that that what our goal should be is that we want to provide people that we want equity, which means that we being very aware and cognizant of when someone might need some additional resources and how we provide those resources in order to provide equity, rather than just trying to treat everyone equally, because trying to treat everyone equally sometimes just ignores the fact that we didn't all start from the same place. But the second thing I want to say is that this is uncomfortable, and this is hard, and this is not something that we can just fix. Systems are in place and are, really, they are often built in stone, and we may not be able to change whole systems. We don't always have necessarily individual power, and we don't always know how to be a good ally to someone who is facing oppression and facing racism in our circles, whether that's at work or in our various communities. But that doesn't mean that we can't do something. It doesn't mean that we can't try. And I think that, as a Christian, I say we have the Spirit of God within us. And that also as a Christian, we have the community here at Messiah, but we also have other communities that we can be supporting each other in this work. And that as white people, it's our responsibility to be doing this work. I think too much of the time we call on Black people and to do the work of educating us, or to do the work of diversity, or we call on our Latinx or Asian American colleagues and friends to do the work. And it shouldn't be the work of the people who are the focus of the oppression to do the work to change that. And so I guess that's my call to us.
Thank you, Amanda. Are you able to hear me? Yes. I was just waiting to see if this captures the microphone. This has been rich, important conversations, and I will encourage all of us in our community to continue. Perhaps we might create someone put a proposal like creating a Zoom group at a different time in which we continue these important conversations. After some years that I've been receiving training specifically in anti-racism, there has been a tool for me that was very helpful. I know that Father Jim knows about it because the places that he and I have been together in this kind of setting and learning. And it's about having productive conversations. And clearly one way to begin this dismantling systemic racism is about being able to have productive conversations rather than counterproductive conversations. And one rule that is so essential in order to do that is that I want to put forward. There are many, but this is really important, is that it's never okay to blame, shame, or attack yourself or others. And so that when we're having these conversations, that it becomes a rule that is important in order to have productive and make progress in the way that we talk about difficult subject. This is a big elephant in the room that we avoid talking, right? So it's not for good reasons. It's something that has been permeated throughout society because we don't want to talk about it or don't have the tools or find the ways to talk about it. Or because we have bad memories, experiences when we had good intentions and did not go well. So all of that we need to keep in mind. But I just want to say that there are tools that would allow us to have these conversations in a very productive way and be able to make change. So we'll consider as a staff the opportunity to create a Zoom where we can continue this beyond Sundays and offer resources and reading books together, because this process, the anti-racism, is an ongoing process and we challenge it in our personal life, in ourselves, in transactions with other people, in our culture, in our organizations. So this is an ongoing work, and we need to learn from one another and be more effective. We're gonna have to wrap it up to get ready for the next service. Appreciate all of you, your willingness and courage to engage in conversations like this. It makes us a greater community. It's a pleasure to see you all, and have a wonderful Sunday.